how to get a job in the video game industry, and then how to, then you can sit up on the panel, and then next year you can tell your story, okay? The byline actually makes a lot of sense because there's some myths and misconceptions about the video game business. You actually don't get to play games that much. There's some, but we'll tell you all about it. My name is Francis Mount, and I work for Capcom, and everybody up here also works for Capcom, but this is not a Capcom panel. It just happens to be all my colleagues that I wrangled to come on this panel, and what we want to do is give back. Most of our other panels are promotional panels, right? Telling about the games, how cool it is to go buy it. This is really just a round table. We're going to tell you our stories, how we got into the business, and hopefully give some insight for you guys, because you all have an interest maybe doing the same thing, right? So the top two questions I always get is always, number one, can I get some free games, right? But number two is, how can I get a job, right? How can I get into business? And this happens so much, so that's why over the years, we've given this panel probably like 10 times now. We've given it at WonderCon and the other Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con, right? And it's become very, very successful, and actually the crowds get larger and larger. What also has been very enriching is the fact that we have alumni that will come back years later, and they'll be like, hey, I did get a job, and it really did work. So hopefully this will work for you too, okay? So moving on. Like I said, there's a whole bunch of us on this panel, but you're going to get a taste of all the different areas that's in the video game business. The most obvious one's obviously to make the game, right? But that's only a fraction of really what goes into the biz. There's so many avenues. So if you're not a hotshot artist, if you're not a super programmer, you're still going to find a job. There's plenty of things to do. And this is just, I would like to call it the fun stuff, right? There's also accounting, legal, HR, right? Stuff like that, right? Well, we didn't want to bring those guys because they're boring. Anyway. Just keeping it real. Just keeping it real, right? So,
sign my check.
Well, this is true. The guy who orders the donuts, he's pretty good too. So, the answer we always give everybody is, in the video game industry, even though it's been around, since the 80s now, the home video game industry at least, right? It's still relatively young. It's not like, the newspaper business or the magazine publishing business or even the movie business, or the music business, where it's really set in and there's certain things you got to do, right? There is, especially in this day and age of apps and, garage programming and making games, it's an exciting time. But the one thing, there really is no one best way. What's cool now, though, in the past, 10 years or so, there's DigiPen and there's all these different courses you get in colleges. But those are still primarily also for programming, right? So here's just a sampling of how everybody on this panel got their jobs. And as you can see, they're all rather non-traditional, okay? So we'll explain what these all mean. So I'll start with me. Again, my name is Francis, and I'm right now the Senior Director of Creative Services and Events at Capcom. How I got into the video game business is I entered an art contest. So way, way, way back, I'm really old, so way, way, way back. But I always wanted to be a comic book artist, and at one time I actually did some early Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics. I did some short stories for Marvel and DC, and then I realized penciling a page for about 2 days straight in my room, not getting any sunlight, meeting any people, wasn't that much fun, right? So I started going to law school, of all things, because I thought I'd be a lawyer. Sucked at being a lawyer, failing out because I was always reading comics or I was playing video games. So one day I go into Toys R Us and I think I bought Contra, the original Contra for the NES. That's how old I am. And May of '89. Anyways, they dropped a copy of GamePro #1. Anybody remember GamePro magazine? Yes. Thank you. R.I.P. Rest in peace. But in the back of it, there was an art contest. Win $100, draw your favorite comic book villain. I'm like, cool. I can use the money. I need it for school. I need it to eat. I sent in this big airbrush, drawing like 20 different characters and all that. Sent it in. Didn't think about it. 2 weeks later, I get a call from GamePro magazine. I was like, cool. Did I win the contest? They're like, no, fool. This contest is for little kids. I sent this gorgeous piece, right? So I was like, well, you're going to use it? And they're like, yeah, we like it. So they paid me like $300 at the time. They used it for some promotional purposes. From that, we established a relationship. I started doing some stories for them. Before law school, I actually went to the University of Pennsylvania, and I was a journalism and literature, English literature major, so I knew how to write. I could put a couple sentences together. So I started writing reviews for them, doing drawings, and then within 6 issues, they called me up and said, hey, we got a job opening. You good with the Mac? You know how to design pages on a computer? I'm like, sure, no problem, right? Went out, quit law school, went out, and never looked back. So that's how I got into the industry. But at GamePro, I did a lot of stuff. I was there for 17 years. Started issue 2, left issue 242, right? In that time, I started as the associate art director. We would design the pages. In those days, we still paste up, glue the pages together, and then we got into desktop publishing. But then I also became the editorial director. And then Chris down there will actually talk some more about editorial because he's younger than me and he'll give you something more relevant. But the thing about editorial, design is one thing. You have to know how to do layouts and how to work with Photoshop and things like that. And I have design folks who will talk about that. Editorial, too, at that point, everyone plays games and everyone has an opinion. But to work for a magazine, it's different. What did you think of GTA 3, right? It sucked. Well, why did it suck? Or it was great. Why is it great? You got 300 words. You owe me the article at the end of the day. It has to be perfect. So that's the stuff I learned in that business. Moving on, I moved through the ranks there, and I became the SVP of the whole company, and then we started doing ancillary business. We started E3. Anybody heard of E3, right? So we started that monstrosity out there. We also did cross promotions with Best Buy. We had a TV show, GamePro TV. We made a line of products. We made a bunch of action figures that I can't even find upstairs. Nobody wants those. But it was really, really fun because it was a chance to dabble in other things, which helped me now when I moved on to Capcom, right? So at Capcom now, as the head of creative services, we produce all the packaging, we produce all the items, promotional items that you see, those Darkstalkers, the headbands you're wearing, the t-shirts you may be getting, things like that. I work with a crack team where we get the assets from Japan and we'll repurpose it and use it for POP displays for Walmart, things like that. And then also I'm in charge of events, which is the fun part because we throw, have you guys been to the Capcom booth, right? You got a chance to see it. That monstrosity, right? We got to get all the, work with the unions and the laborers and build the booth, all those giant graphics, get all the demo stations, and do programming and panels like this for you wonderful folks. So that's what I'm doing right now. That's, as you see, there's a whole smattering of stuff that we'll talk about more, but there's a lot of different things you can do in the business, and I'll shut up and we'll move on to our next speaker, okay? And also let you know, after we're all done, we'll have Q&A so we can wrap some more, okay? Next up, Matt.
All right, hello everybody. So I'm Matt Dahlgren. I'm a senior product manager at Capcom. I work on the strategy team. That means that I'm the main contact that communicates with our R&D teams, and I set the overall marketing strategy for our titles, and then produce all the campaign assets that you see. Then I pass things over to our territory teams, some of whom you're going to hear from in a second, and then they execute things. As far as how I got my job, I think I took kind of an interesting path. I didn't really know what I wanted to do once I got out of high school. I went to college mainly just because, I thought I was supposed to, but I didn't really go for any specific purpose. I didn't have a vision of what I wanted to do. And as such, I didn't last very long. So I dropped out my junior year, and I don't think that's a good advice to give you on how to get into the industry, but there is something to be said that it's okay to not really know what you want to do and to take some time and not just go through the motions and really focus on what you want to do. So I dropped out of college. I knew that I liked video games. That was my number one passion. And they always say you're supposed to make your passion your profession, so I wanted to figure out how to get into it. My biggest passion was fighting games. I played fighting games my whole life growing up. And I started organizing my own tournaments. And I think that's actually a really good thing to do because you're actually community building and you're getting to know people and you're actually producing something. And it shows people that you're a hardcore gamer. So I used that experience to get my first job as a video game tester. So once I got my foot in the door, basically I just knew some other friends from Sony, passed my resume along, showed all the stuff I did in the community, and so got in there. I did that for about 2 years, and then I actually was able to leverage my community experience to move over into marketing. I'd say video game testing normally will lead you more into development than it does into marketing, but for me I was able to leverage the fighting game experience to go over into marketing.